You know these men. They're the Brothers Grimm. You know them because they wrote fairy tales, which most of you probably think, as I did until I actually went to read them, are these wonderful stories you should read to your children. They are not. These are extraordinarily bloody, moralistic accounts that no child should ever read. They're awful, awful stories. But you think they're great because another company took these stories and retold them in a way that crafts your memory of growing up, the Disney Corporation. The Disney Corporation took these stories and retold them in this wonderful, creative way because the stories lived in an intellectual commons. They lived in a place where they were free to be taken. They lived in a place where you didn't need the permission of a lawyer-free zone. That's what the commons is. And a lawyer-free zone is an extraordinary encouragement to innovation and creativity. Now, this work that Disney took was free to take because the Constitution of the United States says copyrights are for, quote, limited times. And though the meaning of limited times was relatively clear to the framers, they thought it meant a short interval, and they set up a term that was 14 years if the author lived maybe 28 years. Over time, this term has grown. The copyright term has extended and extended by act of Congress. It has been extended 11 times in the last 40 years. The last of these extensions was in 1998. This was the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, otherwise known by affectionate sorts as the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. The Mickey Mouse Protection Act, which essentially assures that work does not pass into the public domain anymore. Every time work is about to pass into the public domain, the term is extended, meaning that no one can do to Disney what Disney did to the Brothers Grimm. The mouse is not allowed.
Welcome to the December 14th Zeitgeist Movement ZM Global Radio Show. My name is Ben McLeish, and I'll be with you for about an hour today. With some updates, what's going on in the movement, milestones for the next couple of months, and then an extended sort of talk on art in a resource-based economy. It's a topic that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, so I thought I'd devote some time to it. So, media updates first off in the news. The Occupy movement is still going strong in various places, and recently Peter and Jen Wilding and Jason Lord went to Occupy Venice, which isn't in Venice, unfortunately, Venice Beach, California, part of LA, to discuss a resource-based economy in front of an Occupy audience, basically. And they seemed very receptive. It's very good. The video's up for that already, so you can look up Occupy Venice Town Hall for that. That's rather nice. It's good to see the town halls still going and starting to take root and become a little bit more widespread as we start to sort of interact in the real world with each other about the kinds of ideas and general social and cultural discussion. It's quite good to see. You'll have also seen Peter Joseph was on Russia Today again for the third time about a week and a half ago. That's quite nice to see, isn't it? I quite enjoy seeing these points about a resource-based economy that we talk about, the portions of economics that are normally not spoken about, to be said on TV, to be given some kind of space and some kind of recognition is, I think, in itself really quite rewarding to see. And just to finish things up, we were invited, Will Dixon, the speaker at Z-Day 2010 and 2011, and hopefully 2012. He and I were both interviewed for a documentary being made by some Portsmouth University students. Funnily enough, I got contacted by two different groups for an interview, and they were both on the same course and knew each other, so it was rather good. So, it's nice to cover absolutely every area of culture. We shouldn't discriminate when it comes to having a chance to put our ideas on some kind of platform to really permeate culture in every kind of way that we can. On the project side of things, obviously Z-Day 2012 is now slowly making its way around the corner. We are at the end, or pretty much the end of 2011, halfway through December already, and slowly the teams, I think, are gearing up to sort of organise the main events that'll be going around the world on the 10th of March 2012, which is that year's date for Z-Day. I myself am in the London event, organising that already, and the ticket's already up for that actually as well. If you go onto Eventbrite and search Zeitgeist Day, or indeed you just go directly to zday2012.eventbrite.com, you can see the tickets for the London event there. The main event, of course, this year, in the sense of the one that has Peter at it, I guess, and is being deliberately created in a large setting, is in Vancouver. So it should be very nice, very good to go there. I know quite a few people from the UK going over to speak as well. And yes, so the tickets are out for that. We are starting to plan the program. It's going to be bigger than last year. We're going to organise more things than last year. There's going to be 2 or 3 concurrent rooms where, parallel to speakers, will be other events going on as well. So other speakers, smaller events, Q&A sessions, particular focuses on particular technologies or areas of discussion, and hopefully we're going to show some films as well. We live in the era of free documentaries now, and so many of them are incredible and so well researched that it really seems like a waste not to at least have some kind of video showing from somebody who's maybe not associated with the movement but has made a particular artistic expression that documents something we specifically talk about. So we're going to have a lot of that stuff as well, and we've put out a call for submissions for that as well. We are inviting the next generation of speakers to come and speak and talk and propose ideas, and you can submit your own ideas by emailing an abstract, a description of some, 200 words with your main talking points or what kind of particular angle you're bringing to the table. You can email that to zday@thezeitgeistmovementuk.com. And we're just collecting those. Deadline for those is end of December, simply for planning purposes. And so we hope to have a lot of new speakers, a lot of new talent, a lot of new descriptions of things from different points of view. That's, of course, what it's always been about, is getting to as many people as possible to talk about this kind of stuff from their points of views, marrying up the sort of central information into a worldview. So we're very much looking forward to that. And one final thing, a recommendation from me, is in addition to getting involved on a general scale, reading books and interacting with people and talking about this, it's of course good to dedicate any spare cycles that we have to technological progress. As such, the computer program BOINC that's been mentioned before, BOINC, which is a Berkeley project to harness unused computer cycles for large-scale data projects. That has just been reminded. We've sent a reminder out to the movement. At the moment, we're backing a project called Malaria Control. So if you search Malaria Control, one word, and BOINC, you'll find the project page for it. Follow the simple guidelines to join up and start, dedicating the idle cycles of your computer to, sequencing the genome for malaria, or sequencing the malaria evolution patterns. That's on there. It's free. It's it's easy, and it's something concrete. It's very, very important. So yes, that about brings it to the end of the news cycle. So I wanted to talk now about art in a resource-based economy. This is essentially the second lecture, a sort of radio lecture that I'm doing to provide 3 talking points that we might not have covered so in depth before. So this is art in a resource-based economy. In our advocacy of a resource-based economy, we often speak of the humanizing of technology, efficiency, city systems, advanced agriculture, and the like. We speak of the final disenslavement from the monetary system in the face of ongoing technological unemployment and the irreversible and inevitable collapse of the debt-based system of global monetary governance. We paint a picture of radically reorganized infrastructure according to need and provision, of an access abundance of life goods for all the world's people, because to look after everyone is to guarantee the safety of the self too. We factor in the coming age of nanotechnology, which offers both incredible and terrifying prospects for the future. And we strive for the positive while attempting to outgrow the values that might lead to the negative. And we speak of technological systems that operate successfully with nature, based on the understanding that pollution is a sign of serious maloperation, of inefficiency, of unsustainability, and that clean, renewable, stable, and sustainable systems means a clean, supportive, and healthy environment automatically, both as a prerequisite for successful life support for humans and non-humans, and as a necessary resulting effect of a system geared towards such function to begin with. A system that is life-supportive is as minimally detrimental to the environment as a logical side effect. After all, the environment is also a life support system. And that's all well and good that we talk about all of that. But what kind of culture would a social system predicated on openness, free life support, and technological advancement and social evolution even look like? What happens to the human endeavors of sculpture, art, music, painting, performance, theatre in such a system? Is it seen as inefficient and sort of wiped away? Or is it somehow ignored, unrealized, or left unpromoted? Do we risk homogenization of culture, where fashion and art would be similar to the marketing of McDonald's, one-size-fits-all marginal room for custom lifestyle, for fear that it's too costly to the resources, if we're having to support disparate and individual artistic expressions? Well, I suppose to answer this, we need to sort of define what art's function is in relation to a society. We also need to understand how our present culture interacts with it. So here are the basic sources and effects of the cultural wing of society we might want to consider. Art is, above all else, an attempt at communication, with or without words. In fact, words themselves are art, in a way, it could be said, especially obvious if we're looking at onomatopoeic words like drip and howl that actually sound like what they're describing. Language is an artifice for communication and can be rendered very beautifully and poetically in a deliberately formulated way to evoke an emotional response. Similarly, paintings attempt to render a visual stimulus, either of what the artist sees or wishes to see, or what he or she wishes the viewer to see. And there are many techniques and styles with which to do this, and different physical media to render it on. We've seen the development from cave paintings, even cave paintings drawn in a way that makes them seem animated by the light of the flickering fire, through to ultra-modern techniques with synthetic paints and canvas materials, to finally the use of Photoshop, which allows creative people to generate images that are so advanced in their rendering that humans are now not able to tell excellent Photoshop work from real life. Music manipulates and patterns the auditory senses and moves many to tears in the process. And again, we see the development from the original percussion beginnings through various stringed instruments, metallic brass instruments, right through to electric instruments, and finally to digital music, digitally generated instruments, and even digitally composed music. So each of these expressions has very different ways of communicating, and they have very different effects. Nobody cheers at a theatre performance the way they might do at a live band or at a football game, and nobody dances around a painting. So we're now able to communicate more in a completely different way than many past artists could. Imagine Mozart with one of the really powerful music programs that we have now. What kind of creation might that have yielded? Of course, we in the future can always return easily to the technologies of Mozart's time, with its harpsichords and so on, but it doesn't work the other way around for them, does it? Mozart cannot be using Apple's Logic program. And we can see how these large artistic legacies have affected and moulded our culture. And of course, we see art change and mould its general tone, not just its instruments, as culture progresses as well. We have definable artistic genres, such as the visual art genres of Expressionism, Futurism, Cubism, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and in music, the various classical genres, rock and roll, techno, pop, and of course everyone's favourite grindcore, thrash-influenced Norwegian black metal. And these genres, these movements, give future connoisseurs of art and cultural production not only a sense of a general spirit of the age as far as how and in what common formats and languages artists were engaging in to register amongst their contemporaries, but you also get a sense in what evolutionary order the art or cultural endeavour came from, what its historical context is, where it emerged from, and what might have given it that shift. So in short, artistic production could be seen as an evolution of ideas and methods, and reflections or echoings of the surroundings or prior artistic expressions as well. It's an ecosystem of influence, a point that we can sort of return to later. Additionally, culture itself is informed and inspired by the artistic propositions of the times. Art very much can act as a mirror, both supportive and critical of the current state of affairs, forged by artists who have been encouraged or moulded by their cultural landscape. As such, art and society are very closely linked, and you can't see them completely separately. They're both sort of a product of each other. And in a way, art is a human expression of what it's like to be alive now. So a final point on this developmental line that we see in sort of visual or musical or any other artistic endeavour. The important point to make, even though it's perhaps an obvious one, is that there is of course a good reason why the baseline for pretty much every culture in the world is percussive music at first and then develops, or cave painting and then develops. With very few exceptions, if any, the first step in musical evolution worldwide, or at least one of the oldest we can trace back in our prehistory, is sort of drum and percussion. And slowly, as we've evolved new tools and discovered that music can be generated from strings, the style of music develops as well. Instruments become larger and more complex and are able to have a series of expressive ranges, such as the pianoforte, known to us as the piano, whose real innovation was playing softly or loudly, unlike Mozart's harpsichord, which plucks evenly at the same strength, even if you hammer the keys like a bastard. I've tried this, same strength both times, and people looked at me a bit weirdly. Quite evidently, art and culture is steered and enabled by technology, is the overarching point on this. Its foundation really is the application of mental and physical technologies to create something. And as our tools have become more varied, so has our expression using those tools. The arrival of the Gutenberg press spread physical technologies in the form of books so that the mental technologies of reading and writing could be disseminated, essentially, or at least that was the long-term effect of that technology. And as much as our semantic and aesthetic senses tell us that art is the ethereal, the undefined, or the non-definable, and that may be true of what people denote as artistic inspiration, or the strong predisposition to a particular discipline like painting, which is being called being born with it to the general culture. But ultimately, art uses technological tools to render its creation, and in turn, these tools stimulate our imaginations, and we create further projects with new scopes based on them as well. And technologies open things up. The line of least resistance, i.e. the one of most efficiency, seems to be what is followed by technological progress. I'm not saying it's an engineering law, but new technologies are favoured if they alleviate and simplify. And this typically means faster, more widespread, to a greater effect, things working and being available in a larger and wider sense, malleability in the effects. It's certainly meant that effect for art and cultural production in general, at least from what's become available. Now our tools aren't individuated like brushes and paints. Now the tools have become a global network of tools, tied by the internet, the media, global trade. The audience is now global too, for many of the art forms, through the internet and related technologies. And with this comes a serious point about where we've seen a vast amount of creativity stem from in the last 20 years. The growth of the net has been down to something specific, and it's even more foundational than the law that surrounds use and copyright and so on. Even below the level of law, there is a code bed for the internet itself, which began on an end-to-end based system. This means that random users with the skill and imagination can create the most interesting developments for that network to begin with. Hotmail AIM, and many other services were forged by end-to-end network users, often by teenagers who ended up being, millionaires. A privately owned platform, a non-end-to-end network, would only have as many developers as the owners of the network themselves. The end users become locked out of the creativity game. And end-to-end networks' pool of development is the number of people connected to it. As Lawrence Lessig put it in The Internet's Coming Silent Spring, it is this architecture, not just sets of laws, that allow for creativity. You could have all the laws you can imagine promoting free artistic reuse of prior works, or guaranteeing on paper the open access to such works by the general public. But if the system architecture doesn't allow this to begin with, the laws are completely moot. It's a little bit like having free speech zones in America, or the idea of a society based on free speech in which you also have corporate-owned media in a complete dominance. That isn't free speech. You're completely separated out from the general discourse and the control of that discourse. So, as the accessibility of these technologies grows almost exponentially every year, at least according to Ray Kurzweil, so the number of possible innovators grows as well. The number of people now included by and subject to that system. So it's fair to say that in a society that predicates itself on access, openness, and permanent redevelopment according to technical feedback, we would see the internet developing artistic endeavors, enabling new expressions at astonishing rates. Let's do a thought experiment with sculpture. Now, what happens when we add the fairly young technology of 3D printing to a network of connected individuals like the internet and make the systems interrelate, as we did with the telephone and computers? That omni-integratable potentiality that we hear from Buckminster Fuller. If we have those two systems connected together, so the effects of one can be streamed out onto the effects of another one, well, it might just be that we're just around the corner from a completely new way to sculpt artworks. I mean, formerly we sculpted individuated artworks, mostly out of marble or sand or ice or something physical, to get the final piece. And duplication will also have to be by hand in that scenario where we're basing it on physical labor. Now, many people only experience famous works of sculpture as images on their screens or on postcards as a result of that, simply because scarcity dictates the easiest way, at least for a while and for some, was to take and distribute images of this sculpture to gain some paltry version of the effect of seeing a sculpture in real life, of being subject to that artwork. Well, in an age where we can design items in 3D on a computer first, and then rapid prototype or 3D print these items into the physical space as real-world copy, the entire model of that is flipped around. We begin with the image on a screen, an image that would have been the ultimate result of the previous, actually sculpted work, and we reverse engineer sculpture into real space and generate no longer scarce single models across years of work, but widely available sculptures. Each individual one can be immediately viewed electronically or can be immediately printed worldwide. And let's take into account, of course, 3D printing at the moment is rather simple. It uses mostly, glue-based, kind of polymers that it sort of melts and sets, plastic. But, of course, we're rapidly speeding towards great advancements in that, to be able to print with actual materials. So it could be, this kind of sculpture doesn't have to be printed in plastic and it looks awful. The whole point is that we're going to be developing technologies that make it look incredible in the real space. And what's more, if 3D printing is widespread and they're common household items like normal printers are now, delivery of sculpture will change to instant access. This coupled hand in hand with hopefully a less hoarding mentality than is common amongst people in our current society. This is the future, not just of sculpture, but of many household items, allowing for the abilities of the 3D printer to be used for those items. People will be able to print clothes hooks. They can already do this now. They already are printing clothes hooks now. It's going to become common accepted preference. And first for the standard items, and then maybe also for cultural production too, artistic sculptures. Now, derivative works can be applied to a sculpture in new ways as well. As the so-called original is digital, derivative sculptures can be versioned off an original file very easily. You can develop on top of the actual file itself, add layers to it to create something in the physical space that's entirely new. And this creates multiple derivative works, each automatically listed as a derivative, because you can tie the files together, the electronic files. You can see all the derivatives of every derivative that's been linked to the profile of a particular work, and where that may have come from as well. And part of a subset of these artists' endeavors could be to do with the upgrading of the printers themselves to be able to use new media to create sculptures or new programs that can assist with design. Gradually, being an artist could mix more heavily with the ways artists understand and modify the technologies for themselves and each other. Hacking, art hacking, essentially. Now, this probably makes artists of today cringe. They probably don't want to learn code or imagine fidgeting with gadgets that they can't stand, or they might feel that that's not an artistic endeavor or not part of the artistic endeavor. Well, that may be so, but here's 2 quick points on this that I think might be helpful. One is that it's actually self-selecting for some, this process, and we forget how self-selecting it is. It's not that anyone's forced into doing a particular expression or work. Looking at what people do to customize their mobile phone software on YouTube alone shows the enthusiasm people have for endeavors without a monetary incentive. What's become normality for many raised with the tools is to play with them, is to decompile, to fix, to get increasingly technical in your interactions with them. For some, not for everyone. But the results are shared. The view that this is moving in the wrong direction for art is invalid, doesn't mean anything. It's just the clash that you're experiencing between your own notions of art, which are heavily fed by the social surroundings, what you've received from growing up now, and the outlook and identity of an artist who will consider entirely new areas of expertise as part of their future art form. This sort of cognitive dissonance can be seen in photography, where we still inhabit the same living memory of dark rooms and digital photography revolving around home computers. Photography today means a great deal of subtle design work of a pretty technical nature sometimes, something that would have never been considered part of being a photographer back in the 1970s. You're involved in quite a heavy amount of computer design now because we have started using computers to enhance the art form of photography. And that brings us to point 2. Despite the fact that this particular thought exercise assumes a widespread model with many participants for, sculpture, for example, it doesn't mean that the end of every traditional method of sculpture or art form is about to occur. Just as we have real sculptors now, traditional painters, even revivals of traditional music forms like the Gregorian choral music, which rose in the late 1990s. Many people express the fear that art itself will become an automated process, that will lose the sort of, the manual dexterity of it. But we can always do the manual dexterity of art. We don't lose any of that by upgrading art as well. We, of course, can use Mozart's harpsichord as well as we can use Logic Pro or another music program. And some people are also a little bit worried about the fact that the creation of art seems to be becoming more automated as well. And people like Ray Kurzweil have created computerized systems that can create artworks after a certain artistic style or mimic a particular painter based on advanced pattern mimicry and I think he called the company Kurzweil Cyber Art. But ultimately, this doesn't mean anything for how people will involve themselves in art. Art's motivation is very much driven by a desire to render something. You may pay for an automated shopping service, so you don't have to go out and lift a bunch of items. But nobody is making their robot go for a walk around the countryside for them. Human expression is human expression, and technology has always been used in expected and unexpected ways to further it, not actually to replace it. And since art existed way before money, we can also safely say that art does not require monetary incentive in order to exist in a society to begin with. Now, that point is worth examining fairly closely. It tends to be disregarded as likely because of course, everything we're surrounded by these days seems engulfed in monetary functions of some kind. So it seems completely unlikely to us that we could imagine this kind of interaction taking place? Well, two studies in particular are interesting to note in this regard. One was published under the title Intrinsic Motivation and Artistic Success by Jean Catherine Carney, and compared the resulting careers of students at a Chicago art school that had been plotted on a scale of motivation for becoming artists during their tuition. Those with powerful and obvious monetary incentives to become artists, especially in the category of males, fared worse than those who showed less evidence of being extrinsically motivated than their more capital-driven art school student friends. The other study looked at artistic output versus monetary incentive and was published under the title The Case of Creativity by Amabile, Phillips and Collins in 1993. And the study asked 23 American artists each to supply 10 commissioned pieces they had previously created and 10 non-commissioned works that they had created. Then the aesthetics experts that were enlisted by Amabile, Phillips and Collins were subjected to a selection of these paintings without being aware of the selection process, not knowing that some had been paid for and some had been just created by the artists for its own sake. The overall normalized results showed that the non-commissioned works fared better in creativity, in measured levels of artistic merit, if you like, meaning that the very effect of monetary incentives is measurably stagnating for the artistic process, at least according to those findings. Daniel Pink, in the book Drive, explains that some of the reason behind this might be that a commissioned work essentially carries a burden of expectation with it from the payer, including subject matter that could be covered by a paid piece and subject matter that could not be possibly covered by such a piece. Non-commissioned work is made by you, for nobody in particular perhaps, and can cover anything in any way. There are no barriers to it. It is yours. So it seems both the success and quality of artistic careers are inverse to the scale or prospect of monetary gain from the enterprise, at least in two of these studies. Following a trend of behavior such as this, I think we can extrapolate, hopefully, that a society concentrated on enabling its population artistically and generally would see an explosion of creativity that would dwarf the Renaissance both in scale and beauty, I feel. After all, despite the two studies above, one has to admit, we do not reward art and cultural production in any real way compared to the way that what we spend on what we euphemistically refer to as defense. The painter Van Gogh, the musician the composer Franz Schubert, and countless others are famed for living poor lives, their work only gaining acceptance in the afterlife once they had passed. And what's the first thing that's cut in our present society during times of depression or recession? Art and culture. Britain closes 400 public libraries in 1 year. Those are your books. The UK Film Council was wrapped up in 2011. No more funding for independent film from them. Many artists now run their artistic projects on the side of regular forced labour, which they must endure to be able to eat and pay their way in the society. As such, a massive amount of art would seem to be created in our spare time. Culture is marginalised as what's left after the working day. And what is left after the working day is not enough for what I would consider to be a validated and meaningful place for art and culture in human society. Information wants to be free. So does artistic creation. What about theme and focus? What might art become about in a society based on true equality, where poverty is an unaccepted element of society, as taboo as racist behaviour is now, or should be? Is all the art in this kind of new system happy? Is it all resource-based? Does it have that kind of tangent to it? Well, as much as I'd like to believe that art in a resource-based economy would all be positive, whatever that means, we all know that life will always contain some sort of suffering for every person, whether it's the loss of a loved one or acquaintances or illness or some upheaval in personal life. A great deal of people believe that art is an expression of pain, and many, including some of my family members, work in therapeutic art sessions. After the Asian tsunami in 2004, my cousin was helping out at an art therapy placement in India along the affected eastern coast. Children who had recently seen the devastation of their whole world drew waves crashing, floodwaters, and sea-based paintings during their sessions, already working out and framing the experiences as a form of processing life. Human beings need artistic endeavors to be able to live in the world. And to paraphrase comedian Lee Camp, if you drew as a kid and you liked it, and you don't now, even though you were quite good at it, ask yourself why the hell you stopped. Or rather, what was it that stopped you? And of course, those who consider today's model of social operation to be a driver of artistic diversity should really be openly disappointed by the resulting homogeneity we've seen. The cultural theorist Pierre Bourdieu explained this quite succinctly. If a channel runs a successful program, whatever it is, whether it's the latest reality TV show or whatever, it will be mimicked by rival TV companies in order to cash in on a proven market as quickly as possible. As such, we get more derivatives fill our schedules than original programs. And even many new ideas are used using established hooks and content. As such, cultural homogeneity isn't an unfortunate byproduct of modern civilization. It's what should be expected when artistic work is generated in this way to begin with. However, a wider point about artistic focus might be interesting to indulge in as well. Artistic expressions also cross taboo lines. Critically, it has a certain ability to provide social critique under the radar. The engaging nature of the particular creation can sometimes sneak in ideas which are hard to formulate publicly without that sort of emotional engagement. Or satire can denounce the politics and influence of the very medium of art it's using. At the moment, we have a series in the UK on Channel 4 by satirist Charlie Brooker called Black Mirror. I would very much recommend everybody goes and watches the 2 episodes that exist at the moment. There's sort of several hour-long stories in an unrelated series, very much like The Twilight Zone, but about modern life, outrageously satirizing modern TV and modern cultural life's hollow, vainglorious cultural production, or the darker side of social network and celebrity culture. They are not easy viewing, I'll say that, but they're very, very powerful because they manage to say things in a way that is so overt almost, but it's disguised by its delivery. And the show contains sentiments that, if communicated outside of their fictionalized framework, they would simply not be palatable to begin with. So it opens up the possibility for what kind of communication we can engage in. Additionally, art has always housed a great, many-sided debate over society, and so homogenizing it into some bland unity would not only be entirely boring and uncreative, but it wouldn't even work. Nobody can dictate the space that artists inhabit and what they speak about. And heated debate comes from that dispute. And if there were such a heated debate, it would also stimulate dialogue, communication, and thus actually more artistic fodder to begin with. So there's no dictation of what art can be about. The conflict between what art is about and what your life is about is what's so interesting about it. Now, the darker side of artistic expression, of course, essentially at the other end of the enthusiastic self-drive to create, is the use of it in propaganda. Film, paintings, or even literary works or music essentially seek to hijack the emotional engagement afforded by art to its consumers, to its receivers, to brainwash or deliver values that, while advertised as positive or galvanizing to a society, might indeed prove to be pushing ideologies that result in far more negative and divisive effects. And of course, that's a bad thing. On the softer side of propaganda is advertising, which uses popular engaging imagery from positive life values to sell anything, even if, and almost especially if, it's unrelated to that imagery. On the further side of propaganda sliding scale are balls-out war films and manufactured news, created with as much deliberate subjectivity as any artistic creation is. But of course, we're speaking about a society which promotes open, informed dialogue, access, and equality. This is exactly the kind of basis one needs for a culture that is resistant to exploitative artistic works as possible, without censorship. The resource-based economic model, coupled with emergent life values, would be the strongest position from which to be immune to abusive propagandist work. And while we're on censorship, as a society develops towards the resource-based model, towards a model based on actual life, as living standards grow, as technological innovation speeds up and begins aiding cultural production, as the understandings of its thought processes and the reasoning behind sustainable culture grows, censorship has to necessarily drop. No longer is an established fixed value system in operation that needs to be protected through censorship. The value system now is in part based on updating the values themselves. Openness voids the ability for censorship anyway. And if the thought of censorship in culture being diminished scares you or makes you worry about excessively violent or inappropriate content being widely available, it is arguable that the production of excessive amounts of violence or sex might just drop in a society that respects life-supporting values. Even within this divisive model we work with now, today's values, a gigantic proportion of art doesn't require censorship or regulation or deliberate placement. All that's hoped for is to promote what we can artistically deliver. And with that, censorship will drop as well as we start to align towards different sets of values and different cultural production. Finally, we would hope to see in a society which frames one of its central goals as the provision of the means of life at no cost, would be a surge in the number of individuals that would dedicate themselves to a life of artistic creativity. Many barriers exist at the moment which prevent a great deal of closet geniuses from becoming involved in art to begin with, because the life means support is simply not there for that endeavour. As such, we're missing out right now on tons of new artistic endeavours which we don't pay heed to as a culture and don't miss, because having never been created to begin with, we don't see the absence of these works, we don't see the detriment of it, because it's unregistered. So, to enable human freedom of participation, to enable large-scale dedications of certain projects or works, is to enable art and cultural production on a grand scale as well. It is the unlocking of the human brain from merely mindless and pointless labour to fulfil its own creative desires. And this, of course, is a big point in transitional thinking. As of today, young people who announce their intentions to be artists or to go into creative fields might be judged to be motivated by something other than money and earnings. These sorts of intentions are often discouraged or are given less support than someone who was, quote, doing a real job. The real job, of course, mostly involving very little that's relevant to social well-being. This model is flipped on its head if the fundamentals of a resource-based economy take hold in culture. It will be the creative that are seen as normal. And imagine that. And those who wouldn't want to take part in the enabled creativity, they might draw a surprised look from parents or onlookers. It might be that way around in the future. And we have plenty of resources to go around to give this new wave of artistic endeavours the chance to participate. Currently, some 99% of industrial materials used in the USA end up as waste within 6 weeks. 6 weeks. All the wasted energy, cheap materials, redundant patterns of production, all yield an almost 100% waste cycle. Now, were we to even raise the bar to 30% in efficiency, so we're only wasting a third of materials, only that, the increase from the original baseline, which was 1%, to that 70% non-waste cycle of material use, we'd have multiplied our efficiency 70 times. Now, 100% increase would have been to non-wastage of 2% from that 1%. Just going up to 2% non-wastage, 100% increase. A doubling of lasting goods. So an increase to 70% non-waste would be a jump of 7,000%, and we're still wasting 30% of the materials. This is a crazy amount of growth that we can manage. We have no shortage of supply of materials for human endeavours, except, of course, if we continue to waste them in such a grand way as we do now. So, to summarise, a resource-based economy by its design would promote the ability for involvement in artistic ventures, would promote the best tools and the best environment for nurturing new artists. Advanced technologies can render more staggering creations, distribute them, and in an end-to-end structure would allow for the remix culture that Lawrence Lessig and others have spoken about for so long. The focus of the resource-based model is to encourage, without limitation, the artistic endeavours of all the people. And listeners, I submit this for your consideration. A society without adequate culture, with no art, with no creative expressions, is not only a blind, deaf, and dumb one in a cultural sense, but a dead one too. And a cultural landscape of vibrancy, creation, of sensory input is an alive one, because it reminds you of what it is to be alive, ever so briefly, right now. Thanks for listening.